Right, I can see there's still people joining. We'll get started with the programme just to keep us all on track. So we've got an hour ahead of us today. So big welcome to you from iMOVE. This is the first webinar that we've done since we've been forced into our working from home conditions, and obviously we're devastated not to bring transport. I was personally very devastated not to bring Transport of Tomorrow to you after a year's worth of work and a lot of support from key partners, including our partners who will be on the call today, ITLS, University of Sydney, and IAG. So I'm glad you could make it for this particular broadcast, and it will be available post-event as well. We know there's people from Europe that are very interested in what we're doing, so we'll make that the video available and the slides available. As a webinar attendee, there's no voice or camera, so all your questions should be directed through the Q&A box, and we'll manage those as we go along. But the idea is that the programme will run with David's presentation first of all, which will run for 25 minutes approximately. Then we'll follow that with Sam from IAG. His will run for 15 minutes, and then a Q&A. So the Q&A can be directed to David and Sam. If anyone's got any burning questions to actually ask iMOVE, then Leanne and Ian can also hop in to answer those. So without further ado, I'll introduce our facilitator for today. So Kate Mackay is Technical Director of Transport Planning at Mott Macdonald, and I'm doing the official bio here, Kate, so everyone knows the full history. You're based in Brisbane, leading Mott Macdonald's future mobility work in Australia. So Kate's been doing this stuff for over 20 years, and she's focused on applying understanding of travel behaviour change to develop better transport strategies and policies. She's a respected advisor and practitioner of travel demand management, and she's developed and managed Australia's largest and most effective workplace transport strategy, and authored a number of government and non-government guidance publications on travel plans. So Kate's also led a number of nationally significant market research exercises in Fiji, South Africa and the UK, and has previously run her own transport consultancy and worked with Steer Davies in London. So Kate, I'm going to hand over to you to facilitate from here, and yep, I'll be around to help out if you need anything.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jackie. And thank you to everyone who's joined us for this iMOVE Transport of Tomorrow webinar about mobility as a service, to hear from David Hensher and from Sam Lorimer. I think we've had over 200 people register from across Australia, New Zealand and the UK. So a huge welcome to you all. Mobility as a service, MaaS, it's definitely one of the buzzwords from the last couple of years. You know, the prospect of delivering the mobility system beyond the private car, which is how we interpret MaaS, is hugely alluring. You know, imagine a world in which it's as easy and as low a level of cognitive effort for you to step out of your front door and reach your destination using active, shared or public modes as it is for you to pick up your car keys and to drive there. And in our new COVID-19 world, the opportunity and the imperative for this, I personally think, couldn't be stronger. But whilst the term MaaS might be new, the core underlying prospect of providing the user with a more integrated, more seamless and convenient experience of mobility beyond the private car isn't. It's decades old. Indeed, I'm frequently reminded of a project I was involved in with the London Docklands Corporation back in 1997, which had exactly that aspiration and indeed that title, Seamless Transport. Our experience suggests that there needs to be some caution over the degree of optimism for the prospects of MaaS, particularly about how or whether it can deliver further influence beyond that which has already been achieved in the evolution of MaaS to date. Technologically deterministic rhetoric and limited trials and limited behavioural insights from them can foster hype over substance. So for us, it's clear that more needs to be understood about prospective user reactions to trials and to the implementation of MaaS. And here really lies the source of better understanding of the true potential of MaaS. And as the uncertainty of recent months has highlighted starkly, planning for the future, including planning for MaaS, by looking at past trends, by looking in the rearview mirror, as we like to say, is not fit for purpose. So I'm sure you can understand I'm absolutely delighted to be facilitating this session, which is reporting on the first real life trial in Australia of mobility as a service. Before I introduce our speakers, I'd like to pose a question for you to answer, and it should appear on your screen in a minute. And the question is, how would you describe your attitudes to MaaS right now? So it's just one choice. Are you a supporter or a skeptic or not sure? We'll ask this question again at the end of the presentation and see if anyone has changed their mind based on what they've heard from David and from Sam. So now I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Professor David Hensher. David is founding director of the Institute of Transport and Logistics Studies at the University of Sydney. He's internationally renowned as a leading research pioneer who has dedicated his career to the analysis and improvement of infrastructure systems around the world. Educated in Kenya, England and Australia, David is a fellow of the Australian Academy of Social Sciences. He's also a recipient of the 2009 International Association of Travel Behaviour Research Lifetime Achievement Award in recognition for his long-standing and exceptional contribution to this organisation, as well as to the wider travel behaviour community. Over to you, David.
I'm delighted to be part of the first webinar of iMOVE, and the focus will be on the Sydney trial, which we have done jointly with IAG and Tripgo through the support of iMOVE CRC. But I will begin off by talking briefly about the context of MaaS, because that's often something that many people are a little bit unclear about. And so I'm just going to put a very simple definition up. There's a lot of dispute about what this actually means, but simply put, it's a one-stop travel management platform, digitally unifying trip creation, purchase and delivery. And at the top of this slide, you'll see that it's essentially a digital platform that offers through that a range of modes that are supplied under the control of a broker that can be then purchased through a subscription plan or through a simple payee mechanism by users. I'll talk more about that later. But also I want to remind you that MaaS is more than just simply a product designed to give people better choices. It's also an opportunity for us to actually have an impact on the broader societal goals. And I talk here about hopefully creating a boundaryless modal choice, complying with societal goals. And it is as important that we impact on emissions, congestion, generally well-being of society through the opportunities that MaaS hopefully will offer us. So that combination is critically important. And I will not be talking today about the regulatory issues, the institutional issues, the governance structures, which are absolutely essential, including the role of government versus the role of the private sector. But I do refer to a book at the bottom that we're about to publish that talks about those things. Today is very much on the bundle design, how the MaaS trial works and what did we find. So it is mobility as a service is public transport, shared mobility services, both ride share and car share, new mobility technologies, the institutional overlay, but importantly, a premise that we would ideally, as Kate suggested, use this as an opportunity to shift from asset ownership to access on demand. And we're mainly here talking about the private car. But also importantly, there is a sense building that unless MaaS can provide a service that is on par or can exceed private car ownership, then it may struggle to be successful beyond being a niche product. And I also interestingly cite a comment from Sampo Hetanen, who was CEO of MaaS Global, as you know, who recently said that the profitable part of MaaS is having access to a car on the weekend. Otherwise, it will be just a utility service. That's a very important point, that car, even if it's a shared vehicle, as I suspect it will be, must definitely be in the mix. And I would think that with COVID-19, post-COVID-19, that this may actually need to be extended beyond the weekend to 7 days a week. And I'll say more about that later. But I also want to emphasize again that MaaS is not about technology. Technology is a necessary but not sufficient condition. It's all about the vision for our cities and how can it help to make a difference to the aspirations that we all have about the way our cities work. So moving more specifically to MaaS as a product, The focus will be on understanding what is it about the MaaS product that will attract people to want to participate and subscribe. And mobility packages will be very important, which we'll talk to you about. They must relate to people's preferences. In this case, it's mainly the financial offerings. And of course, we need a very effective broker or aggregator that will bring the suppliers together with those who wish to use the services. Before detailing that, I just want to highlight again that one of the major objectives, one of the major goals, or sustainability goals, if you like, is to disrupt the car. And this is a lovely slide suggesting what modal options in the mix that should be considered in a MaaS product could make a difference, but that difference may be at a distance-based segmentation with micro-mobility for the short trips, the ride share for the medium length trips, and then of course car share or car rental, throw away your car keys, as they've done in Antwerp for the private car. We just don't know how that will pan out, but this does raise interesting questions about what modes should be considered in the bundles, depending on the spatial context in which you wish the bundles to achieve a positive outcome. And although we're very early in the learning curve in relation to an interest in MaaS, and as I said, it's going to take some years, I think, before the market fully understands its benefits, or in fact its disbenefits, is that surveys, mainly stated preference surveys, of which we have done and a number of other people have done, including the ITS Australia one with Uni South Australia for iMOVE. Generally speaking, there is a good potential MaaS supporter body of people. We talk about 47% here. Of course, that could be biased upwards. Their stated preferences, and the three clear categories are MaaS-ready individuals and the multimodal public transport supporters. There are clearly those who at this stage are fixated on their car or just don't like new technology for whatever reason. But that does give us some indication as to, I wonder, in a real trial, how might we replicate that evidence that we get from stated choice experiments. So let us move on to the trial and recognise that there are three key components. There's the technology, there's the services to be offered through bundling in particular, and of course there is the new mobility business that will facilitate bringing these together. And we might summarise that through a set of project objectives. These are the objectives right from the beginning, and we've not changed from them. We just want to explore appropriate transport service mixes and subscription plans. We want to see how much uptake there is. We want to know what information needs to be provided to potential participants to make these things actively relevant. We want to see how different bundles might change travel behaviour, especially in terms of achieving sustainability goals. And equally important, we want to learn from the experience. The few trials that have been decent, in my view, around the world lack transparency. In fact, the general view is that there's a lot more trials that fail than those who succeed, and you never get to know why. One can only but speculate. So our objectives are to be totally transparent and share all the experiences, and I think they've been great. So the major components are developing the digital channel app, which is Trippy. It's an extension of the Scedgo's Tripgo app, which enables bookings, information sharing, trip planning type information, payments, invoicing, and so on. There's the modal suppliers, and of course this is an important issue. Some suppliers are not that keen to join in on MaaS. I recall in the beginning Uber was reticent, but they realised that this would not dilute their market and could grow, so they opted in. But it's not just suppliers that we need to understand, it's also participants, and we needed to promote MaaS to the market to see who might be interested. If they're interested, we got them to complete a pre-trial survey, and we undertook onboarding to prepare them for MaaS. And then the real trial, which I'm about to talk to you about, involved the testing of a range of bundles in the context of PayG. I should say that there was a little video shown, a cartoonish video, when people first expressed interest, or to see if they were interested, to actually tell them what MaaS was, because many people do not know what it is. I'm not going to click on this in the interest of time, but it is on YouTube, and you can see the address, and it helped people to understand if it has any legs or not. And we, in the pre-trial survey, one of the interesting results was, and please look at the blue, suggests that there are people that do believe that it may change the way they use particular modes. And it turns out that it's quite a positive for rideshare and public transport, and even changing private car use, which of course is what we had hoped for. So let's get into the bundles, and I'm going to have a fairly high-level summary of the bundles, and a snapshot overview on the left. In November, we started off with page E. We wanted to have a 4-week period for people to get familiar with the app, to make sure it was comprehensible and that it wasn't going to fall over when they used it. And we felt that that was a really important period before we introduced bundles. In fact, we didn't even talk about bundles at that time. And then we prepared ourselves for the first bundle in December, which was 50/50. Back then, we had little real data to be able to guide people's likely responses. But it was really based on a sense that we wanted to do something with public transport and ride share. So we came up with a 50/50 bundle with a reasonable discount on Uber and taxi. We did note that most of those trips were short, so that was quite generous. A 50% reduction in Opal and a subscription fee of $50 a month. It's worth mentioning that we had a sizable set of financial incentives as part of the trial, which we could make available because the suppliers had no intention, and I suspect never will, in providing discounts on their services until the volumes grow. And so the only discounting will have to be done through the aggregator or the broker back to the customer. Then we moved on to a Saver 25, where we started playing around with changing the subscription fee, the Opal price, and the discounts on rideshare. And for the first time, we introduced a discount on car share. I'll give you the results shortly. I just wanted to overview the options. And then we moved into the next month in the Green Pass, where we wanted to really hit public transport in a sustainability sense of having free public transport, still maintaining the same discounts on rideshare, but quite a high subscription fee, because we were interested in seeing how sensitive they were to the subscription fee, given the potential benefits of the discounting. In the final month, March, we then started playing around with lessons learned to be shared soon, and we modified the Saver 25 to a Super Saver 25, which was essentially recognising some way in which we could use rideshare through Uber to provide an attractive first and last mile to public transport. You'll see this little quote at the bottom: without subscription plans, I question the value of MaaS. So let us look briefly at the results, and then I'll look at each month, and then we'll finish off with some lessons learned. What I can say is that we have a very encouraging switch to bundles, and it's interesting that by the time we got to March, we had nearly 37% take up of bundles. So when you think about the stage preference surveys in the 40 to 50 range and the likelihood of some hypothetical bias, this is a pretty encouraging result that reveal preference data does support some great interest in bundles if you actually design them right. I just want to make one point before I move on, and that is that Green Pass, which turned out to be the most popular, did not lead to any revision away from it, but some increase when it was introduced in February and was continued to be offered in March. So in March, we had 4 bundles, of which 1 was a revision. So let us very briefly look at this. In December, with 50/50 only, we had a 10% take up. And in January, with 2 bundles, we had a doubling of that to 20%. And what is interesting, we were able to identify that there are 2 segments that these appeal to. The Saver 25 to the lower level of public transport use, but a greater use of rideshare, and the 50/50 bundle for those who have a higher level of public transport use. There was not a great deal of dilution from one to the other. So it's pretty encouraging that the growth is coming out of page E. And when we move into February, we not only go from 10 to 20, we now go to 37. This is a fascinating result, an almost monthly doubling of the percentage take up of the bundles as we add bundles. In this case, we are talking about the Green Pass, which has clearly been and appeared to be the most successful, despite the higher subscription fee. And based on our analysis of the data in the previous months, that subscription fee with the discounts, given what people were doing, still turned out to be a positive financial benefit. So that's pretty encouraging. And one of the things that I will share with you later and just comment on briefly here is that the sequential introduction of bundles is not only innovative, but in our view, essential if you do not understand the market fully. So by the time we get to March, we have got our bundles with one variation from the previous month, and that is Super Saver 25. We moved to a $5 additional incentive for first and last mile, but also we reviewed the discount versus dollar prices on rideshare, and we found that the dollar was preferred than the discount because of the shortness of the trips, and it was clear as to what the potential benefit was to users. We also, you might note, we tested GoGet, although I haven't talked about this in any detail. We did actually offer a discount on GoGet no matter whether you were pay go or bundle, and it was an absolute failure. So we dumped that. So moving on, the final thing before I talk about some lessons learned is that we now have about 37% of people on bundles in March, but we thought that we wanted to try and find another mechanism to try and focus specifically on achieving the sustainability goals by reducing car use. And so we offered a emission buster challenge to everybody, which was based on a group offer to avoid gaming of individuals of a $1 per participant reward for every 1% reduction of emissions of the group as a whole. And to keep people informed about where they fitted on the scale, we offered them a diagram like the one below for one person, which was shaded according to whether you're a medium or high emitter of CO2. We also explained to them how much CO2 per kilometre came out of each mode of transport. I'm not going to show that. It's in the PDFs. And we were hoping that this might provide some sort of group commitment to see if by everybody making an effort, everybody would benefit. One of the issues that we were particularly concerned about was to avoid gaming, and I don't have time to go through the details, but I can assure you that this particular methodology pretty much minimized the risk that that would happen. So what happened with that emission busting challenge was that we only had a short period in March before COVID set in, and monitoring CO2 emissions over that very limited period showed that there was no financial rewards at all, because in fact CO2 emissions increased by 1%. We cannot conclude anything from that. It was far too early, but what we can say, and this is very encouraging, we pulled out the subset of respondents that also joined the IAG car tracking study, and we analysed their behavioural responses, and in fact nearly 50% of them chose a bundle by the end of March. It's higher than the whole group, and more importantly there was evidence of a reduction in car use. So the conclusion we came from that was that mass bundles do attract interest by active car users, and so that there are real prospects that if you get decent bundles, you can actually get an improvement in reduced car use and hence increased sustainability outcomes. As we know, COVID set in, and hence this is what happened. Huge drop in trips, as you can see to the right, and of course, particularly a huge drop in bus, a huge drop in train, and at that time, a huge drop in car. So you could say disaster all round. We basically abandoned April, other than we are continuing with the Safer Journeys program in April because we were interested to see what happens to car use. So what are some of the lessons? A nice example of a well-planned cascade, as I said to you, I think starting off with pay-as-you-go and then subsequent monthly sequential bundling design. You learn as you go. We believe we've identified some really impactful bundles, and the monthly feedback certainly helped us in achieving that. So that was a good lesson about a methodology, not only in a MaaS trial, but also in MaaS in reality. There was clear interest in MaaS. 37% of participants subscribed to the bundles, and in March that was pretty much the same number. There was some sense of stability arriving, which I think was quite interesting. 4 bundles seem to be doing the trick at this stage. Whether the evidence suggests that these are scalable, we just don't know. And we don't know whether we've got the appropriate bundles, but we certainly have a number that is either equal to or exceeds the better commercial activities or WIM Ubigo and Mobile Flat, none of which make money, by the way. They're either subsidised by government or by venture capital. Have we got the best set of bundles? We have no idea, but what this has done has got us working on a research project cited below with some colleagues in Switzerland as to how we might optimise the mix of bundles going forward from the lessons we've learned, and also the lessons that we're learning from the German experience, which we're also involved in. Very briefly, we're almost there. Qualitative one-on-one interviews with a third of the participants. These are the sort of issues that were important. Clearly, people want value for money. Location of where they live is where they work is crucial, because there's no point offering them a mode if it's just not available. The need for commitment arose as a real constraint on participants' desire to subscribe. And I think this is an interesting one. Novelty or curiosity was quite a big factor for some people. We don't know anything about it. It looks interesting. Let's participate and see if we can learn anything. I think the other thing, which is really a congratulation, especially to IAG, who were the broker, is the onboarding process exceeded expectations. A lot of time was spent one-on-one and subsequently in groups in making sure people fully understand what it is they were participating in. So, and as some of them said, they're super proud to be in this trial, which they saw as innovative and reflecting the future of transport. There was an initial gripe. One of the things that there was a delay in getting the data out of the app was in fact communicating cost savings under different plans. We now have done that, and each individual in February and March was told how much cost savings compared with PayG have they actually obtained in a previous month as a result of subscribing to a bundle. And some of them are quite substantial. One of the other lessons we've learned is the exclusion of relevant modes. We were limited to, apart from public transport, we had a taxi, Uber, GoGet and car rental, but it was fairly clear that some people preferred to use Ola, and even with the Uber discount, Ola was still cheaper than Uber. So what modes are excluded is quite an important issue to think about in the future as to whether they really matter. One thing I can say that I think if you stick to PayG with an app, you might be able to get greater modal coverage, but once you get into bundles where you have much serious commitment from suppliers, it might be virtually impossible to have a single app that can capture all modes. So you might need to have a range of apps that have a range of mixes of modes. And definitely car use can be modified through the appropriate incentives. So obviously this is something I wasn't going to talk about before, but it's obviously high on the agenda now. What might be this post-COVID-19 look like for MaaS? One thing we do know that flattening the curve will be replaced by flattening the peak of transport. And I think my language, I think the camel has died and now we need to preserve the horse. There are a few comments I'd like to make here. I think we have to review the role of the car, and especially the challenges that will be faced in sharing, because under the new biosecurity future, I think the new modal attribute will become biosecurity, and that does involve the reconfiguration of the capacity available on public transport. Already that's happening with people not being allowed to sit next to each other and so on. I think also the work from home is going to be a big issue with social distancing, not just in public transport, but at work. Maybe not everybody can go to work at the same time. Question is, what does this mean for MaaS if in fact some people would only want to work a few days a week and would not be prepared to subscribe to a program that requires a full week or a full month subscription? So there's got to be some reconsideration of that. But on the commercial side, and it's far too early to talk about this, but I get a sense that multimodal might need to be redefined to what I'm calling multi-service, to include the non-transport sector and offering discounts to support MaaS going ahead, because MaaS definitely has sustainable legs. I think we've shown that. It can reduce car use, but it's come at a cost to the broker in order to be able to deliver those services. Whether those costs can be met within the broker's context is a story to be shared. But I think the most important thing that we've got to rethink is the meaning of sharing. and the biosecurity. I'm not going to go into some broader issues, they're in my slides, but I do talk about post-COVID in terms of more broader short-term impacts, especially traffic congestion impacts, which makes the car relatively more attractive. And of course, the longer term impacts on working from home and how that impacts on the need for MaaS mobility. This is an interesting slide. I'm almost there. You see in Switzerland, where they're doing some great tracking, is that the only mode that's grown in a substantial way under COVID has been the bicycle. We have a series of papers we're writing, and hopefully in time you'll get to see these. And just to say that you'll enjoy our book on MaaS coming out in about 1 month's time. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, David. That's some tremendous insights in there, and I'm sure there will be many questions about that trial. I certainly have lots. So we will take questions at the end of the session after we've heard from Sam Lorimer, who is our final speaker. So Sam is IAG's research lead for iMOVE's Sydney Mobility as a Service trial project. And he also heads up IAG's cooperative research portfolio. So Sam's background is in technology products and research in the areas of automated vehicles, connected infrastructure, and also in AI. So over to Sam.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Kate, and thanks, David, for sharing all those succinct summaries of the trial so far. What I want to share with you today is really just a bit of on-the-ground view. So you've sort of seen the overall results of the experimentation that we undertook with the bundles, but in the spirit of some of the transparency David spoke about, we want to share what was it actually like for the participants, what did the app look like that they were using, how did we set this up among the brokers and the transport services to make this viable for the trial period. So this was actually the original page I had. Hopefully corporate comms aren't going to get mad with me. I'm probably showing my age with the Malcolm in the Middle reference, but IAG in this trial was positioned in between all of the different transport services that we were offering, and kind of in between ITLS and Scedgo in providing that bridge to the customers who are using it as well. And maybe we could consider iMOVE as the grandparents of this trial. I'm not going to go there. So I'll quickly share with you why was IAG even interested in this trial? How did we set up the mobility as a service to get it going? And what was it like operating this as a multimodal service in New South Wales? And then a few early commercial considerations. So why MaaS and why IAG for MaaS? So I'm part of the research and development team at IAG, and there's actually been, prior to me joining a couple of years ago, many years of research into mobility, including at a dedicated research centre. So there's a lot of car-related historical research of crash testing and parts pricing, but this is now moving heavily into the new emerging trends in transportation and how that might affect our travel modes into the future. So we definitely see MaaS being one of these, and we were keen to be involved in a practical study that would give some results of how real people would adapt to MaaS being available to them. And we also had a bit of an advantage in participating in the trial, in that obviously as an insurer we had a lot of relationships with some of the providers that you would like to have in MaaS, so we could leverage those existing relationships to stand up a trial maybe with a bit less difficulty than you would have doing it from scratch. So with that in mind, I'll go through how do we set this up. As well as the overarching goals David shared, we had some sort of internal goals around what do we want this experience to be like, to ensure the results that we got from the trial weren't sort of muddied by the participants finding, oh, the app's a bit confusing, or I'm being asked to pay for all this stuff on my own credit card and then I kind of have to charge it back, or I'm not quite sure how they're tracking my travel. Are they like following me around on my phone the whole time and using up my battery? So we wanted to say, all right, we'll approach this and try and make it as commercially comparable as possible. So we wanted a as fully integrated experience as possible, especially from the payments and sort of the trip records. So gathering all the trip records across all the modes centrally and being able to apply the bundling discounts and incentives that David spoke about and pass those on individually to participants through the app. And we didn't mind doing some hard work behind the scenes to do that. So I'm not by any means saying we're going to develop a completely commercial product that would be immediately released, but to the participants, we wanted it to appear very seamless. So we stood up a bit of branding. The Trippy name actually came from participants themselves. We asked all our staff and participants to come up with potential names, and the top ranked one was actually Trippy. We initially did have a few concerns over potentially psychedelic connotations, but we leaned into the fun and playful nature of it, and came up with some branding that was sort of quite playful for all the interactions with participants and the app itself, to make sure they sort of took it in the spirit of trying out new things with their transport options. And David mentioned these services, but just for clarity, these are the services that we included in the trial. The underlying approach was we wanted to hold an account as the broker with each of these providers and make sure that trip data and payment data for all trips taken flowed first to us, so that we could then distribute it to the participants and apply the incentives. So we didn't want there to be any case where participants were paying themselves or needing to claim back, or any sort of intermediary between us providing the service and the participant. And we already had corporate relationships, as mentioned, so a lot of these were extending the existing account, partitioning off an account that we could use specifically for personal travel and have people added to them that could use it for personal travel, charged initially to us, which we could then pass on. And lastly, you'll notice, sadly, we didn't have a bike sharing service up on the screen here, which we'd have loved to have. At the time of beginning the trial, we could not find one that was able to offer that sort of billing arrangement. So sadly, those are, hopefully that's changed if other people are doing these trials, but it's tricky at the moment. No sort of concept of an aggregate account where you could add participants to a bike sharing thing in a sort of a corporate sense. In terms of Opal, we did provide physical Opal cards to the participants. We had some branding there that you could see on the Opal card and the Trippy card. And the reason for the physical card at the time, we did have a lot of people over the course of the trial start to ask questions around, oh, I'm seeing people like tapping their phones and their watches, and could we get some digital thing? Like, that seems very technological, and MaaS should be all over that. From a broker perspective, that posed a few problems to try and set that up, given tapping at the moment was credit card payment. So we weren't really having the appetite of giving every single person who participated their own credit card, given difficulty in ensuring they only charged travel activity to that card. So secondly, getting access to the data that people would have if they were all tapping their own card would be incredibly difficult. So we instead wanted to set up our own master account and provide a really large number of Opal cards all linked to that account that could all have trips flow through, and the payment mechanism coming back to us more seamlessly. For some of the other services, so for cab charge, for example, we use their new digital cab charge card. I think we were one of the first people doing this, actually. So every participant got a digital card in their wallet of their phone. Anytime they took a taxi, they just tapped this card against the reader at the end of the trip, and all that cost and trip information came straight to us. Similarly for Uber, they already have an existing accounts system. You can see there, we can flick a switch to bill it to the MaaS trial, and for the most part, participants just left that on the whole time. So they use that as a proxy for all their personal travel, and we would get all that payment information would be billed through to us, and all the trip data available. So in terms of the app, David mentioned this, so it was called Trippy. Scedgo provided this as a remake of their Tripgo app and did an awesome job adding in the additional functionality that we needed, which was largely on the left there. You can see we needed mobility plans. I apologise, I need to update my screenshots given this was a slide reused from at the start of the trial when it was a MaaS test September bundle. But you get the feel for what this was like. So we needed the ability for people to look at what were the features of a plan that they could potentially opt into, and choose which plan they might opt into in a future month. And on the right-hand side was a new wallet tab. So we wanted every single trip to be itemized on this tab, every different mode and payment, and the transactions tab there would have things. You can see one at the bottom, like any subscription fees coming in and payments that people made against their invoice would all show up in here too. And the wallet master balance at the very top, so there was no ambiguity around their total spend. And this was, we actually had quite a few people with a little bit of bill shock when they started using this. I think I mentioned in the iMOVE article previously, but people were not terribly good at estimating what they currently spent on travel. So starting off the trial with a month purely using it in a pay-as-you-go mode for all the participants to get used to it was pretty instructive and gave them a really good sense of, oh my goodness, this is what I actually spend on travel across these modes. And for the people who are involved in the Safer Journeys program, which David mentioned, which is a crash detection and response product. You should go look that up. I'll give a little plug, a new IAG product. But we had participants consent to give data from that service through so that we could see how many kilometres were driven. And people were quite surprised to sort of see the cost that was having an impact as well. So the other change in the app was obviously we wanted to show which modes, when you were selecting a potential route, might have a discounted rate available. And another technological decision, I guess it's almost become an ideological discussion amongst MaaS, was whether it's all incorporated completely within the app. Is it a complete service and you never need to leave the app? For the purposes of our trial, we made the decision we would do deep linking into the apps for the services that we offered. Two reasons for that. The primary one being we did not have a huge budget to spend a lot of time developing the really deep integrations needed to do it all within one app. And secondly, the services that the individual apps themselves offer do change pretty rapidly, and also people tended to use them for trips that they were already comfortable with. So a lot of people are very comfortable just, flicking open the Uber app, calling an Uber. And we didn't necessarily want to dictate that you had to open up our app, choose your route that you wanted to take, click the book button to sort of get into that flow. We wanted to encourage people to use this, and if it was familiar trips or they knew the mode of transport that they wanted, they didn't need to open that app. So what was it like operating? David touched on this, so I won't spend too long, but yes, we did a really careful onboarding with participants to make sure they understood what was expected of them over the course of the trial. This is one of the beautiful bits of collateral explaining how mobility plans work and when they would expect to have to pay an invoice for the travel that they've taken. We had a really good team working really hard on this to make sure everybody understood and had their devices properly set up, so we weren't marred by people saying, oh, I just couldn't even work it out. Like I couldn't even get on that Uber or public transport that I wanted to because my cards didn't work or the app didn't work. So we got everyone on a really strong starting point and they walked away able to just use it immediately. Through the back end, this is what it looked like. Behind the app, we could feed in all the data from all those modes. We had an API actually to feed most of these in, so there was minimal manual entry needed in terms of trips. This is just a random array of participant information near the end of the trial. You can sort of see start endpoints broadly. I've censored a little bit of anything sensitive with addresses, but we can also see a raw and adjusted cost, which takes into account any incentives that participant was eligible for. David's covered these, so I won't go through the plans again, but this is some of the wording he mentioned that we came up with. So we wanted to try and make it clear, looking at the travel patterns across the previous days and making it clear exactly how much it would cost you should you subscribe to any of the offered plans based on this usage. That was something that really cheered people who were finding it difficult to estimate that cost. And you can see in this particular example, there's quite specific, like pretty reasonable discount of about $40 should that person act in exactly the same way as they did in the previous month. When it came to billing, we actually found as David mentioned, the incentives provided were often much smaller than we had thought. So you can do the math there. I'll do be a test at the end. But if you do that math, you'll find actually the level of incentive given for this example was only very small. Slightly above the 125 subscription fee paid was recouped over that month. And some of the behavioural change was heavily around getting people to use more of those modes that were discounted, such as Opal, quite heavily to get better value and therefore travel more sustainably. So we had a few unexpected things. Obviously, COVID threw us. We needed to refund half of everybody's subscription fees because we didn't want to unfairly encourage people to be taking public transport during that shutdown. We found people giving tips, so we had a little Slack app written to keep us up to date with which trips were getting logged through, and people were giving tips for Uber rides that happened ages in the past, probably because it was the first time they opened the app since the trip. And other fees like tolls and fines and kilometre-based charges of some modes, these would flow through sometimes significantly after the trip ended. So as a broker, there was actually quite a lot of back and forth and ensuring that you had the most up-to-date version of a trip cost at any point in time, well after the end of a particular trip. And super quickly, because I know I'm running up against time, some of the commercial stuff. So the sentiment was very high in terms of people saying, we enjoyed using this. IAG ran a pulse survey every month where we asked people the typical NPS question of, how much would you recommend this to your family and friends? And we had a pretty good, that's a reasonably high in sort of the favourable range of an NPS. We had a lot of people this is super early results as we've done the post-trial, but a lot of people have said, yes, I would continue to pay this if you just made it commercially available. And we also had a lot of emails like the one I've just thrown in on the right saying, oh, I'm a bit sad that you're taking this away. Like, we were really enjoying this and got used to it. So I guess you could say, right, job done. We'll just push publish in the App Store. Great. Well done. Trial complete. But sadly, there's the economics that David touched on, and I think this is really the key. For me, this is the key point of MaaS, is saying, what business model do you apply here to make this commercially viable, especially in this broker role? So obviously we were doing this to learn as much as we could, but if you were doing this in a more commercial lens, it's quite troublesome for you. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but if you have people on a pay-as-you-go who are just paying per trip, there's very little incentive for them to want to pay more per trip to you than they would just by organising the trips on their own. And also there's very little incentive for them to use your service to take those trips. You'll probably just get an incomplete data set. And there's also some competition with people just tapping credit cards that we talked about before. And we've seen a little bit of stuff around a digital Opal pay card. If there's anyone from Transport for New South Wales listening, I'd love to hear more about this and whether a digital Opal pay that would allow you to tap on your phone and pay for other services would have a layer that's suitable for a broker to gather that data. And the last point, I guess, therefore, is if you accept just a pay-go mode might be challenging, then perhaps a bundle offers a solution. Similar to what David mentioned, I do believe maybe you need to offer more services within there than purely the sum of the transport services. Or you need to be able to firmly account for external benefits. So is there this societal benefit of reducing CO2, reducing congestion? We're very keen and looking forward to some of the number crunching that David and the amazing ITLS team and Chin will be doing to sort of break down the unit cost per kilogram of CO2 reduced via behavioural change, and how many dollars per kilometre reduced of car travel for those where we were tracking their car distances. So is there a case where you could argue through a partnership this does have a societal benefit to help with the fact that just in raw economic terms you may be marginally to sort of make much money by offering this purely in the aggregator role. So I think we are going to get more answers to that, and I'm personally really looking forward to seeing that analysis, but I will wrap up now so we have time to answer some of the questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Sam. So before we get on to the Q&A, we'd just like to pose that poll question, which we posed at the beginning. So the question was, how would you describe your attitude to MaaS right now? The poll that we ran at the beginning showed that we have a very positive thinking group of people online. 65% of people are supporters, 21% skeptics, and 14% not sure. So if you care to vote again, we can see if anyone has had their minds changed by listening to Sam and David talk.
There's a lot of pressure on this, Kate. I don't know
There
whether we were trying to convert more supporters or skeptics. What does success look like?
How was your evangelism? Yes. So let's see. And whilst we've got, oh, well, there we go. See, that's you're all in the right jobs. Mm-hmm. So we have had 7% of people converted. So we have been receiving questions as the session has gone on. Conscious of time, aware that we probably won't get through all the questions, but I know iMOVE have committed to trying to get responses from Sam and David to the questions that we have received. So any questions we don't get through today, responses will be posted on the website. And I was intending to go through the questions in order in which we received them, but I hope I'm not going to upset anybody if actually I pick out a question that I think is quite interesting first for the panelists perhaps to address. And the question has come in from Richard Delplace. And Richard says, hi, are you considering providing other benefits to customers beyond discounts for transport for other services that may encourage modal shift, discounts on coffee in specific CBD areas, rewards in form of points that can be translated into transport or other services, for instance?
Well, I might make the first comment if I could. In a sense, that relates to my last slide when I talked about the need, especially in a commercial environment, to have to go outside of the traditional transport model to look at some of those ancillary services. So absolutely right. I think that's going to be essential to make these things work financially. So we would always welcome suggestions. I mean, one of the obvious ones has been some interaction with the retail sector, and even, dare I say, MaaS equivalent of frequent flyer points in order to get additional benefits by joining up.
Yeah, similarly, I think I've touched on that point near the end too. So I love the idea of having some other benefits baked in there. We did also discuss as part of the trial, we talked about some sort of gamification elements as well, where you might have leaderboards of people or putting them into groups of similar to the CO2 challenge, sort of showing people that were changing their behavior in a really good way and trying to encourage some sort of social thing relatively anonymously, but show you what cohort you were sort of moving through and perhaps provide rewards for doing so. So there's lots of interesting things that you could do with that. Yeah, I agree.
Brilliant. Okay, so I'll go back up to the top of the list now. Question from Rory Garland. MaaS would probably stimulate some wider mobility solutions, but will MaaS influence how public transport is operated? If so, how?
Nice to hear from you, Rory. I haven't seen you since we worked on the metro projects many years ago. It's a good question. One of the concerns that I had, certainly pre-COVID, was I didn't see any MaaS-specific initiatives that would be unique to those who signed up for the program in terms of using public transport. But I think it's a great question as to where it might help. Post-COVID, I'm really not sure. It's early days yet, but I do think it's a great question. And my general sense is that there's not going to be any special treatment of public transport for MaaS users compared with other users at this juncture.
I agree. We saw public transport as absolutely key, like the core part of the MaaS offering. So if anything, I think there's potentially a risk of trying to take too many people away from that, unless you're sort of flattening the horse, or whatever the great metaphor that David used at the end was. I think if you move too far towards putting people into Ubers and make that too easy compared to getting on a train, that's potentially an issue. So we were trying to be a bit careful with that, with the way incentives were offered. And I think any sort of plan where you just say it's all you can eat, you know, $500 a month, go crazy, use all the Uber, all the public transport you like, you do risk a lot of people deciding to jump in that Uber all the time and substitute public transport, which is not necessarily what we want, unless it's in the right periods.
I just quickly add, Kate, that the discounting, of course, is all financial, when in fact we know that many people's choice of a mode is more a function of convenience, service levels, reliability. And so there's a real question which we have posed in our work as to how we can build them in to give a distinctive advantage to MaaS compared with just offering financial incentives. I think that's the question, that's the challenge.
Thanks, David. So the next question on the list, very topical, from an anonymous attendee. With COVID-19, we see in some regions, for instance in the Wuhan region, where car usage has significantly increased compared to prior to the pandemic. This could be due to a range of factors, including social distancing. How can MaaS be an attractive proposition to people post-pandemic?
I hinted at that at the beginning, and it's certainly related to the challenge with sharing and social distancing. And I do think we will start to see a greater use of cars in Australia as well. What does this mean for MaaS? If MaaS is going to be pretty much focused on sharing only and not doing something about protecting through biosecurity a non-shared mode, then I think we're in real trouble.
Yeah, I concur. I think I don't see MaaS as necessarily in itself changing the modes per se. It's what you would include in the bundle. So we may see new forms of on-demand transport emerge that are more post-COVID friendly, and perhaps partitioning people that sit in them while allowing there to be some sort of sharing take place, or greater distancing inside shared transport. I think those changes will come, but the question around MaaS's influence on that, I think if you have an appropriate sort of a bundle that includes the private modes that people want, there's also car subscription services like Car Bar, etc., that could be put into these, that are sort of, you can change a car month on month. Anything that's reducing the ownership still falling into this bucket and could potentially be adapted to suit these sort of situations.
I think my point on working from home is going to be increasingly important as well, and it might need to result in MaaS being rethought in terms of its pricing model and how you subscribe in terms of the time period.
Thanks, David. In view of time, I'm afraid I think we're going to have to call a halt to the questions there. There are quite a few more that I hope we'll find the time to respond to and put that up on the iMOVE website. So it really just remains for me to say thank you very much to the panelists for their contribution to this session. It's been absolutely fascinating. I'm sure you'll all agree, and I've been very privileged to facilitate it. And I'll hand over to iMOVE to Jackie to close out.
Well, thanks, Kate. That was really great, and I enjoyed it, and it seems like other people did too. There's been quite a number of other questions coming through. Particular apology to Jeff Kasparian that we didn't get round to your question. I know you'll be devastated, and Jeff has a long and trusted history working with us at iMOVE, having been our program director previously. So sorry about that, Jeff. We'll get back to you. Otherwise, thanks everyone for joining us. Please let us know if you've got ideas for other webinars. The Transport of Tomorrow website is still live, so you can have a look at the programme. If there's anything that catches your eye, we are talking to other speakers about putting some of the content online. So thanks very much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again in the near future.